Hi everyone, it's Darlene. Welcome to the first video in my series, One Stamp, Four Ways. I'll be using this Cloudy Sky stamp set by Simon Says Stamp and designing a new card with it each week during the month of March. So every Friday I'll be back with a new card. For my first card, I'm going to be using the stamp set as a background. So I'm just going to do some repeat stamping. I'm using the Distress kind of looking cloud in the lower right. So I'm going to grab that, and also I'm going to use a Stamp-A-Majig to get all of my clouds lined up. So I'm going to prepare my Stamp-A-Majig by stamping it with some VersaFine Black Onyx ink so it's nice and clear on my sheet. And then I took a piece of Neenah Solar white cardstock, which is cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I used some surgical tape to adhere it to my craft mat so it wouldn't move. And I'll use my Stamp-A-Majig to just stamp my first one here. I'm using Simon Says Stamp Sea Glass ink. Once I get my first one stamped, I'm going to use my T-square to create a guide for stamping the rest of the clouds on this row. So I'm just going to use my pencil to just make a few dots here and there just to make sure that I can see where I'm stamping my clouds. And then again, I'll use my Stamp-A-Majig to make sure I'm lining them up directly on those pencil marks. And I'm sort of judging the distance between the clouds, right and left, with my eyes, just, making sure that they're relatively the same. I started my first cloud off the cardstock, and that's just to make it look a little bit more random. Now once I finish that first row, I'm going to take that, you see that big bump kind of in the middle of this cloud, and I'm going to line it up right underneath the right side of that cloud. And you can start underneath any of the clouds, it really doesn't matter. But I didn't want to have it directly in between the clouds just to be a little bit more random and interesting. And I'm going to go through the same process each time I do a row, which is take my T-square, draw my dots to make sure I have a guide for stamping all of the clouds across. Now I'm just finishing up that second row, and then periodically I'm going to go in there and erase those pencil marks and also clean up my craft mat a little bit for where I stamped on the craft mat, just because I don't want to get any ink on my cardstock where I don't want it. I tend to do that a lot. So anyway, I'm just going to go through this process on all of these rows until I get to the bottom. And you'll notice that I have a little bit of space at the bottom, and I do want to cut this panel a little bit so I can mat it on a card base that's a standard A2 and have a little white space on the outside. So I determined I could cut off about 3/16 of an inch, but it'll vary depending on how far you space out your clouds, but just kind of get a nice picture of all the clouds in there. I'm using this ThermoWeb iCraft adhesive. It's just a double-sided adhesive, so you're going to peel off one side, and then I'm going to take this. I noticed there was a little glob of glue on there, but it didn't seem to affect anything. Anyway, I'm just moving on, and I just put it directly onto a piece of black cardstock. I'm using the Hello You Thinlits by Stampin' Up. I really like the font of these words, and I want my sticky side to be on the back of my sentiment, so I'll flip my cardstock over. And I decided it would be better, since I can't see it, to cut off the excess black on the side. So I'm just going to go ahead with a scissor and trim this out. And that way I know that when I put my die on the black portion of it, I'll be getting adhesive on all parts of it. So I'm going to run that through my Big Shot, and I've got a piece of scratch paper here. And what I normally do when I want to emboss something is I just stick it there temporarily, and that holds it in place while I put the embossing powder on and put the Versamark on. But because the backing was kind of slippery, it didn't really stick. So I had to use my paper piercer. It all worked out just fine because it's pretty thin. And then I just held it really carefully when I sprinkled the embossing powder on. And then I just heated to set it. I just wanted to have something a little shiny and make it pop a little bit more, which is why I'm clear embossing this. Since my word die is black, I wanted my sub-sentiment to be white. So I'm going to use this Label Love set by Altenew. It has a Just For You, so I'm going to cut off the just, and I'll have For You. I got this set of washi tape by Stampin' Up, and the packaging wasn't really reusable, so I just tied all of the rings together with a piece of embroidery thread so I could keep them together. I really like this striped one because it's kind of hand-drawn stripes, so it's a little interesting. And I'm going to grab it, I'm going to tear it off, and then I'm going to place it about where I want my sentiment to be. And so I'm just kind of eyeballing it. I want a full cloud to show underneath, and then I'll wrap it around the side, and then I determined I was a little bit too far over, which is fine because this tape comes off easily, and then I ripped it again. It's very thin, so it's nice and pliable, and then you can put it right back down on your cardstock. I'm going to take some glue dots, these are micro glue dots, and I'll take my 4U sentiment, and when you place paper onto the glue dot itself, it'll stick to it and come off that release backing. So just go ahead and do it 3 times, 3 close together on the left side of the sentiment. That's where my thread is going to be. I have this really pretty silver metallic thread. It's made by DMC. And so what I'm going to do is pull a bunch off the spool, and I'm going to use my fingers to wrap it around. So I have all 4 fingers, so I'll hold it at the top with my thumb, and then I'm going to wrap it a few times around all 4 fingers. So I'm including also, I've got big loops here, and then I'm going to put it over 3 fingers a couple of times, and then 2, so I get different size loops. And then I'll end up back at the top, and I'm going to grab it around my pinky, which is where I've wrapped it every single time. And that's the part that I'm going to put onto my glue dot. So I'm just going to cut it off from the thread there. And then it really doesn't have to be anything specific. I just kind of made sure I had enough glue dots on there to get all the pieces of this thread. You can put it on one glue dot, or you could spread it out across all 3. It really doesn't matter. But then you can kind of arrange it the way you want. And the ends, what I did with the ends is I just sort of looped them around and stuck them to the glue dots also. So you can actually make some of your big loops smaller by sticking them to the glue dots if you want to, but I kind of wrapped it around the wrong direction, I think, so my loop was a little strange on this one. So I would recommend putting it in the same direction each time. But you can always loop the ends back in, and then I cut it off where it had a little bit of extra there over the glue dot. And so you have full circles, you don't have any thread sticking out. Now I'll tell you that arranging these circles, these thread circles, can be kind of addicting. So you really have to just tell yourself to stop, because it is supposed to be a mess of circles. All right, so that next step is going to be take some Stampin' Up! Dimensionals, just any kind of foam tape will work. And I'm going to cover the back here. And actually one of them I had to trim out because it was too thick. But I'm going to peel the backing off. And then I'm going to take my Happy, because I want this to lay on top of my Happy. And I'm going to do this on my craft mat, because if I did it on the paper, it would stick to the paper, and I'm not ready to stick it to the paper. I'm just kind of figuring out where I want it to lay. And once I get it on top of the P there, then I can take off the Happy release tape from that double-sided adhesive that I used, and it peels right off. And this is nice because you don't have to worry about putting glue behind it, and that's why I use the double-sided adhesive. All right, so then I'm just going to kind of grab it by the 4U, because that was the easiest way to grab it, and just place it where I want it. And once I get it arranged the way I want it, I'm just going to press it down. And I kind of put the silver thread behind part of the Happy sentiment and part of it in front of it. So the double-sided adhesive was fine. I didn't have any issues with it not being able to stick. I was really happy with how it turned out. I want this to pop up on my card base a little bit, so I'm going to take some Scotch foam tape, put it on the back of my panel, and then I'm going to adhere it to my 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch folded Neenah Solar White. And then I wanted to add a little bit more detail, so I've got these metallic sequins by Stampin' Up! There's black, gold, silver, white, and clear in circles, stars, and hearts. So there's a lot in this little container here. I'm going to grab my pick-me-up stick and pick out the ones that I want. I'm going to use some black, some silver, white, and there's also clear. So I had a couple of clear ones in there too. So I'm going to use my pick-me-up stick and my multi-medium matte, which is just glue that doesn't dry shiny. It dries matte, which is nice, so you won't be able to see it like through the hole of the sequin or anything like that. So I just pick them up, put my glue down, and put it right back down. And that way they're exactly the way I arranged them. And that's the card for today. If you remember, I used Sea Glass for my clouds. The first version of this card, I used Soft Sky by Stampin' Up! So here's the card using Soft Sky. I thought maybe it was a little bit too dark, which is why for the second one I went with Sea Glass, but I'm not sure. I think I might like the Soft Sky a little bit better. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I will see you for session 2 next week.